Welcome, Life Sciences, to another exciting life science lesson. We are looking at the heart. Well, we've actually looked at the heart. We're going to continue today with looking at the blood vessels, right? How the heart has to pump the blood throughout the body. We're going to look at this whole concept, right, of blood vessels, what their structure is, what they do, how they're going to pump throughout the body. And we're actually going to look at a new system as well today that I think you might not be too familiar with, and that could be the lymphatic system. I don't think you might not have heard about it before, but it's going to form part of the circulatory system. So we're going to get on with that. Very interesting little tidbit. If I show you, all right, this little piece that I did a little bit of research just to make sure that I was correct. We're doing blood vessels today. So when I talk about blood vessels, I'm going to be speaking about the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. And what happens is if we take all of our arteries and veins and our capillaries out of the body and we lay them down 100,000 kilometers, you have enough blood vessels in your body to go 1.5 times around the earth, right? That to me, I think is pretty amazing. All of this blood, now remember, it's really important because why? We need to have so many blood vessels because we've got to make sure that each and every single one of our cells gets that vital oxygen. And then what happens? Cellular respiration, we produce carbon dioxide, and we need to get that out of our body. Efficiency, right? A lot of it, which makes it very important, more efficient, and we can get things done much easier. Okay, as I said to you today, what we're going to look at is this whole concept of, we looked at the heart. So now we're looking at the heart is this pump. How do we get the blood around the body? All right. What does it contain in? We're looking at this concept, what we call a double circulatory system. We're looking at the different blood vessels. Sorry. We are also looking at this concept of lymphatic system, and then we're going to finally end off with the diseases of the cardiovascular system. Sometimes things don't always work as they should. Right, remember a lot of terms that might be new to you that you're not familiar with. Make sure that you always, all right, are familiar with the terms. Are you familiar with the terminology? Not only to be able to understand, but remember you are going to write exams, you are going to write tests, and there's always there's terminology in your test. There's multiple choice, all of those things. And in order for you to understand all of that, you must make sure that you know the terms. Okay, so a picture that we should be familiar with, the heart, right? We have looked at the heart. We even dissected the heart, right, which was quite phenomenal. So when we looked at the heart, what is this heart? This heart is this mass of muscle, that's all it is, and what muscle can do is contract and relax. It beats, all right? It is the pump. So if I look at the size of my fist, because that's the size of the human heart, if I look at this fist-sized organ, that is just the pumping behind, all right, the heart, or the blood that we have to get through. Now, I've got top of my head, I've got to the very tiny bit of my toes. I've got to make sure that each and every cell, right, in my body receives nutrients, oxygen, and food, right? And the heart is just the pumping part of it. The blood that I have must travel in these different vessels, and that's what we're going to look at today. But when we look at the heart, right, one thing you will notice that we see a lot of are these structures, right, are these tubes. And these tubes are the blood vessels. And as I say to you, all that the heart is a pumping mechanism. We looked at how the blood travels through the heart, but the blood has to come into the heart and go out of the heart. And as I say to you, the heart is just this pumping mechanism. Now, if we look at our thoracic cavity, right, so here's my rib cage, right, and here's my heart, right, what is in close contact with my heart but these lungs? And that is a very important concept when we look at how the heart functions. And what do I mean by this is very important. our system, all right, first of all, is a closed circulatory system. Now, we looked at that in the previous lessons. When we look at this closed circulation, what does it mean? Very simply means that blood must stay, all right, in blood vessels. It must stay in it. So very simply, we need the blood vessels, all right, are going to transport the blood. We cannot have the blood leave those vessels. If we do, a whole lot of clotting process has to occur. But our body has what we call a double circulatory system. And what do we mean by that is quite simply, the blood must come back to the heart twice. All right, that's what double is. The blood must come back to the heart twice. How do I mean by that? Let's look at this function. Okay, so what happens is blood comes to, right, the heart. What color is it? Very often when we use the blue, right, it's deoxygenated blood. What does that mean? It's rich in carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is a waste product that we must get rid of, okay? So if it comes to the heart, here's the heart, it goes to the heart. The heart has to take it, pump it out to where? The lungs. That's what pulmonary means. Pulmonary is the word we use any kind of lung connotation. So we've got to get, so from the heart goes to the lungs. That is circuit number 1. What happens in the lungs? A process called gaseous exchange. Gas exchange. And that's exactly what happens. Carbon dioxide goes out of the lungs, and what do the lungs put into the blood but this lovely fresh oxygen? So where does this fresh oxygen have to go? To the heart again. Second time around, double circulation. What does the heart then need to do? The heart now needs to pump it to the rest of the body. Okay, so when we talk about a double circulation, the blood filled with wastes, carbon dioxide in this thing, comes to the heart pumps it to the lungs change the carbon dioxide for lovely fresh oxygen, and it goes back to the heart. Double means 2, all right? So out from the heart, then back into the heart. Now remember, this is happening all at the same time. Comes into this heart, all right, and what do we have? Right, the heart then takes it, and that's why we need this pump. Remember, the left-hand side of the heart was nice and thick, and we squeezed everything out, and what did it do? It went out through these blood vessels. Okay, all right. Now, if you have a look at this diagram, it's a little bit more intricate, and basically what it's just telling you, right, is that every single major part of the body, because this would be your head and that would be your arms, every single major part of your body has to get oxygen, all right, and that is your systemic circulation. Okay, guys, now let's have a look at the blood vessels. Now, the blood vessels, right, are what the blood is going to be contained in. And very much when I think about it, I think about our road system, right? You've got to have lots of big highways, right, where lots of things travel through, and then the roads get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's probably the road by your house, because what do you have to do? Each house is a cell, and that's exactly the concept we're looking at here. So we've got big blood vessels, really big ones, and they're going to have to narrow down into these smaller ones. So we're going to look at the concept of an artery, a vein, and a capillary, right? Those are the names that we give to the blood vessels that are going to, right, transport the blood throughout the body. Guys, we have a closed blood system, and what that means is blood cannot leave the blood vessels. If you have a look at this diagram over here, you will see it is a continuous layer. So what we're going to find is lovely, fresh, oxygenated blood is going to come through these lovely, big, all right, arteries. And they need to get to the tiny little cells. And if they're big, they're not going to perform their function. So basically what has to happen is they've got to get smaller and smaller. So an artery will become a very small arteriole, and eventually when it gets to the cells will be this really tiny structure that we call the capillary, and we'll look at the structure of that just now. So what happens is, all right, all the lovely oxygen and food gets deposited, and the carbon dioxide and the wastes come back. They now need to go back to the heart. Why? Because they're filled with carbon dioxide. So the capillaries, now from going from big to small, we're going to go from small to big. The small capillaries are now going to go, because they're full of carbon dioxide, we use them as blue, they're going to go into a small venule, and those small venules are going to enter into really big veins. And those veins are then going to take the blood to the heart, and the heart is then going to pump the blood to the lungs, right, to get nice, fresh, oxygenated air. Okay. Let us have a look before we go into the in-depth about an artery and a vein and a capillary. We're going to hit back on mammalian tissue. Mammalian tissue is going to come back here and bite you in the behind. All right, what do I mean by that? If you have a look at the labels, all of them, all right, are going to be from, right, mammalian tissue. So when we look at a blood vessel, okay, we got on the outside, we've got this really nice connective tissue. A blood vessel must keep its shape. But what does a blood vessel have to do? What's behind it? A pump. A blood vessel has to pump as well. So that means blood vessels, all right, should also have a muscle, and blood vessels stretch and relax. That means there must be some elastic tissue in there, okay? So we've got nice connective tissue, collagen, right? We did it in a mammalian tissue. We've got elastic fibers, we've got muscle, and lining the inside, guys, this very inner layer over here, right? Put your tongue, all right, on your cheek, that lovely, smooth, squamous epithelium. Squamous epithelium, lovely, smooth, thin layer, lines your mouth, but it also lines the blood vessels. Why? Because blood needs to have this really, really smooth run in it. Okay, guys, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Welcome back, Life Sciences. I hope you enjoyed that short break. You know what I always say, get that oxygen going through the blood vessels, through the heart pumping, what we're doing now. Right, so guys, what are we looking at today? Right, so we're looking at the blood vessels. We looked at this concept of the heart, which is this muscular pump that's going to beat the blood right around the body, but we have this closed circulatory system, and our blood has to stay inside these structures that we call blood vessels, all right? And we looked at, just before the break, we looked at what a blood vessel, right, the general structure of a blood vessel is. And now we're going to take a closer look at the structures of arteries, veins, and capillaries. Once again, all right, please make sure that you know the terminology, understand the words and their meaning, that you obviously understand the work, and that you can also obviously use them. So guys, when we look at an artery, a vein, or a capillary, obviously these blood vessels, we looked at the general structure just before we had the break. Now, when we look at them, when you saw that diagram, all right, each of them don't have the same structure. Now that sounds a little bit weird when I showed you the typical structure, but an artery needs to be slightly different than a vein, and a capillary needs to be different than a vein and an artery. So basically what we're looking at is like a model. We might have all three of those layers, right, differently, because a vein and an artery and a capillary are going to do things differently, structure versus function. So we're going to have a look at how can I identify an artery, how can I identify a vein, and how will I be able to identify a capillary? Okay, let's start off with arteries. Now guys, when we talk about an artery, right, I always try to think of the first function that I've put here. The function of an artery takes blood away from the heart. Now, A for away. Okay, now that is very important. Here I have my heart. Any blood vessel that goes away from the heart, right, is given the name of an artery. Now, the second most point is very often a lot of people say this. They say, arteries carry oxygenated blood. Yes, they do. However, that is not the correct definition of an artery because there is this one little exception to the rule, and that is the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary artery. Those two take these rules and kind of like flow them out the window. What do I mean by that is, the pulmonary artery, okay, the pulmonary artery that goes away from the heart to the lungs. There's my lung, and I'm going to change my color. Have a look what blood it has. Right, it has deoxygenated blood. So unfortunately, when it comes to that terminology, we can't always use that term. So a more accurate definition is mostly oxygenated blood. Okay. Also what will happen is, guys, arteries are under a lot of pressure. Why? What's behind them? A pump. Pump. So my arteries are really, they're pumping the blood. And you'll very often find that my arteries are deeper in my body. Why are my arteries deeper? My arteries are deeper to protect it. Because if I cut an artery, because of that, that high pump from the heart, the artery can squeeze. It's going to actually squirt blood out. And if I was to cut it, what will happen is I'd probably bleed to death very quickly. All right, so what do? Is I keep them slightly deeper in the body. If you go and look at all these over here that you can see on your arms, right, those are going to be the veins. Right, they're closer to the surface because they don't have this, right, dire need to be protected. Okay, so now if we have a look at an artery, we've got the 3 layers, right? So the first layer, very important. I'm going to go from the inside outwards. Nice, smooth endothelium, right? It's hollow over here because what's going to be in the middle over here is blood. This lovely, smooth squamous epithelium, but we call it endothelium. But what makes an artery so much, all right, when you have a look at a picture, you'll see it. It has this huge, big muscle layer. Why? All right? Why has arteries got this big muscle? What do? They must pump the blood to the rest of the body. So they've got the heart behind them, but they've got to get the blood from here all the way to the top of my head to the bottom of my toes. They've got to squeeze everything. They've got to make sure that they are able with this to move. How do I move things? Muscles. To move the blood around the body. So an artery, all right, so when we're looking at those 3 layers, it's got the lovely big collagen around, thicker, all right? It's got a much thicker muscle layer, and it's got the endothelium. So it's got those 3 layers. I just tweak the muscle layer so that I can get the blood around a little bit more. Okay, so that brings me now to veins. So here's my heart, all right, and let's change to, right, the blue. We can see for now. It brings blood back to the heart. So again, what's going to happen is, right, any kind of vessel bringing blood to the heart is called a vein. Now again, all right, like the arteries, it mostly pumps deoxygenated blood. And why do I say that? Here's my lungs, right, there's my lungs, the pulmonary vein. You're right, the pulmonary vein brings in lovely, fresh, oxygenated blood. So that's an exception. That's why we can't do that. Okay. Now, guys, This, it seems quite funny for me, because if I was to make a vein, I would put a large muscle layer in it, all right, to get it to actually squeeze back up again. But funny enough, all right, it doesn't. Let's have a look at the structure. If you have a look at the vein, all right, it has a much larger opening, right? The blood goes through here. Now remember, it's got to come all the way up. So imagine your tiny little toe, it's got to come all the way up, all right? But look here, look at this very thin layer of muscle. A vein has a very thin layer of muscle in it, okay? I would have actually, if I were to have made it, I would have thought that veins would have had, all right, the muscle to get things up, but they don't. So the body has to compensate for it. So what happens is, it flows up, okay, but what have we got to do? We've got to stop it from flowing back again. So just like the heart, guess what we have? Right, we have valves. Veins have valves, right, to stop the black backflow. All right, and you will also see very often veins run near a muscle. So when I do work, the muscle actually squishes it and it forces the blood upwards. Okay, so the veins got a little bit of help on that side. Now, unfortunately, females are prone to this, right? Sometimes we cross our legs and whatnot. It's a thing called varicose veins. And what happens is our veins get all funnily twisted, if I can say that. So over here, right, there's what a normal vein would look like. Now what happens is the veins sometimes, all right, are not working as they should. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen that. We call them spider veins. They form like little knobs, and you can see, all right, all the veins. They're not the arteries, they're the veins on your body. Quite a while back, you used to have them cut out, and now they can actually laser it, all right, and get those working quite nicely. So guys, have a look at this picture, all right, over here. I want you to have a look at this diagram and this diagram. Okay, this is an artery. This is an artery. Why? Beautiful, thick muscle and a very narrow lumen. Over here, look at the vein, all floppy, right, all floppy, wider, right, under less pressure. And if you have a look at these little ones, these are going to be your capillaries. Now, capillaries are the next thing that we're going to look at. Guys, this is when you get a bruise or anything, or the blood at the top, this is what you've broken, your capillaries. And they are very, 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 all right, thin. Oh, let me go back here. Okay, guys, one layer thick. One single layer of endothelium. Why don't we want muscle? Why don't we want? Because this is where movement, diffusion, osmosis, this is where that occurs. Any kind of movement occurs here. And if we want to, right, so if I go back to the function, anytime I want to move anything around, how would I want to do it easily? If it was made up of a single layer of cells. Okay, so just remember that. And then the last thing we have to look at is blood pressure. Now, I don't know if you've ever had your blood pressure measured, but why am I putting it in here with your arteries and veins? Guys, it's a machine that measures the pressure, all right, of your arteries against the wall, the blood pushing against your wall. We're going to have a look at this later on when we look at hypertension. Welcome back, Life Sciences, from your wee break. All right, we hope you got the blood flowing, the oxygen flowing, the heart pumping, just clears out our mind and makes, all right, concentration much easier. We're looking at the blood vessels of the heart, and we've finished with looking, all right, at how the blood travels through the heart, through these blood vessels, okay? And we're now going to look at a different circulatory system altogether. So the heart, right, is going to circulate blood. So when we look at, all right, this concept, you did this when you looked at mammalian tissue, all right? So what was mammalian tissue? Here, blood. What did we have? We have these blood vessels that we've looked at. Here's our blood vessels. And we looked at an artery, a vein, or capillary. And their function, all right, was to transport this tissue. Now, we don't go over it now because you looked at it when we looked at mammalian tissue. Okay. But what it is, just remember, it's made up of two components. And the first component is this liquid medium called blood plasma. And that's going to play an important role in the concept that I'm going to look at now. In the blood plasma, other than things dissolved in the blood plasma, what else did we see in blood? We had a look, all right? Blood, most of the blood carries this red blood cells, right? Erythrocytes, and their function was to carry oxygen. And then we had the larger white blood cells, and that was part of your immune system. And we're going to see, we're going to have a little feature in the next section that's the same. And then these little weird looking ones, if you can remember, those are going to be your platelets, and those played a role, right, in the whole concept of blood clotting, coagulation. So all of this blood is all part of the cardiovascular system, okay? That is where blood is transported. The next system we're looking at is your lymphatic system. It is also a transport system, but it's obviously not going to transport blood. Okay, so basically what we're going to have, now let's just get the concept right, the terminology right. My lymphatic system, and I'm going to show you a picture just now, right, is also made up of vessels. So it's going to be very, very similar to blood. It's not going to be blood vessels, they're going to be lymph vessels, but it's also this network of tubes. All right, now, most importantly, they're going to carry a substance called lymph. Whereas our blood circulatory system, all right, our circulatory carried blood, our lymphatic system is going to transport this fluid that we call lymph. Okay, and basically what it does is, when I show you a picture just now, is your lymphatic system is going to drain excess tissue fluid and return it to the blood system. And I think you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, so I'm going to explain the whole concept to you. Right, have a look at these two diagrams. This diagram over here is obviously showing, all right, our cardiovascular system, blood and the heart, all right, and the blood vessels. This diagram over here is showing us our lymphatic system. Now, if you notice, if you have a look in the reds and the blues, arteries and veins always join one another, all right, closed system. In our lymphatic system, we don't have that. They just start somewhere, okay? And what they basically do is, what you're going to see is lymph is going to move into these parts, and you're going to have glands. You'll see later, for example, you'll have lymph glands over here, lymph glands over here, underneath your arm. And what you will notice, glands, they filter there. And what this system does, lymphatic system does, it makes white blood cells. It actually helps with your immune system. So if you're sick and the doctor does this over here, and he's checking to see if your glands are swollen, if it's swollen, that means the white blood cells, all right, are working, and that means that you have an infection. That there's a body, maybe a bacterial, whatever infection, and your body is trying to fight it. So this system, all right, plays a bit of the same role as your white blood cells. It produces lymphocytes. But the main thing that it does, it's like it needs to drain excess tissue fluid. And you're like, what is tissue fluid? Let's find out what tissue fluid is. Okay, guys, now if we look, this is a very important concept, especially when we're going to look later on, right, at this concept of homeostasis. So what happens now is the following. The capillaries bring in this concept called blood plasma, right, the liquid part of blood. And if you notice over here, the blue, guys, very simple thing, you are not divorced, you are not biltong. Around all of your cells is this watery layer called intracellular fluid that's inside, or interstitial fluid on the outside, or tissue fluid. Nice, easier name, tissue fluid, that interstitial. But can you see all of your tissues are bathed in this watery substance? Now, why does that say to play a role in homeostasis? Is that this watery substance must always have a constant temperature, glucose level, gases, specifically carbon dioxide, all right? It needs to have pH. Okay, so these things over here always need to be correct. Now, how do I get this watery fluid over here? Quite simple. Now remember my highway. What happens if I'm stuck on the highway and I've got to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller? Pressure builds up, traffic jams, okay? So what happens? All this blood goes into these tiny capillaries. And those tiny capillaries have actually got little holes in it. So what happens is the blood plasma, the cells are too big, the blood plasma filters out. Right, let me use a different color, it will be easier. The blood plasma filters out and it bathes these tissues. Right, so basically it's almost like blood plasma, but we can't call it blood plasma, it's like tissue fluid. All right, so now let's think. If water is totally coming out, this blood plasma, if it's seeping out and seeping out, what do you think would happen to me? Look what's happening. I look like the Oros man. The water's filling up, the water's filling up. And what happens? Yes, I look like a huge giant balloon. So what do you think my lymphatic system does? It drains that excess fluid, okay? So I must have this bathing, my tissues must be in this liquid, all right? But I can't have this large amount of water in me. I've got to be drained, because where does it come from? The blood. I've got to return it back to the blood. So what I do is, this is how it happens. Look at the green. Okay, so the green is my lymph. So here comes my capillaries. There's my tissue fluid, you see, all bathing over here. And what happens is the lymph takes in that excess tissue fluid. So it starts off as blood plasma, then it becomes tissue fluid. The lymph takes the excess. It drains in the excess, and now it's lymph. All right? It's lymph tissue. It now travels through these lymph vessels, okay? And it gets filtered out. Guess what? Right at the top here, just above my heart, at my right and left subclavian veins, that excess fluid joins my circulatory system, and my levels, all right? My blood levels are maintained and my tissue levels are maintained. Okay, so I need that. It drains all the excess. What else did I say that it does? All right? It also helps, okay? When I'm sick, it makes white blood cells and antibodies, so it fights immune system. But one thing you also, when you look at digestion, guys, when I eat fat, where must fat go? Let's go to biochemistry. Fat doesn't mix with water. So if when I eat any kind of fats and it goes into my blood system, what could it do to my blood system? Could clog it. So how do I transport fats? I transport fats. You're going to see it when you look at digestion later on, right? The lymphatic system. You're going to see a little structure in your small intestine, and fats are going to go directly in there. It's called the villus, all right? Very important part. Now you'll see now, have a look at this picture that I've given you. This is what happens when our lymph glands become blocked, right? I put this picture of this model in because she actually made the news lately, right? She was in the news quite a bit because she has this thing, it's called elephantiasis, and what it is her lymph glands in one of the legs. It usually happens in the legs, as I could say, a beautiful lady, right, who's promoting, right, that she has this disorder, right, called elephantiasis. Do you see what I mean? What's happened? The fluid is not getting anywhere. The lymph is blocked. You can also get it from a parasite, all right, that can also block it. So what's happening is her drainage system is not working, or anybody that has it, and all this tissue fluid is accumulating. Okay, so as I said, that is the function of this lymphatic system, something new, all right, for you to think about. That's all we have time for. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back, Life Sciences. Hope you enjoyed that break. As I said, get the body moving, get the blood going, get the oxygen flowing. It's really good to improve your concentration, and it's much easier just to take those short breaks. What are we looking at? We're looking at, all right, the blood vessels and how the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries, how they are structured, all right, to carry blood around the body. They each have their different structure because they've got a slightly different function. And then we looked at this whole new circulatory system called the lymphatic system, which ties in hand with the blood, right, to make sure that our tissue fluid, that internal balance in our body is really, really important. As we finished off with the lymphatic system, you saw that whole concept of elephantiasis, right, or edema. Edema is the swelling of the tissue fluid, right? When you get hurt and your body swells, that's what happens, is the tissue fluid, all right, builds up around that injured area, and it actually acts as a protection to you, all right, to show that you're injured, but also to help that injured area. Which brings us on to the next concept that we're going to look at. Obviously, our circulatory system doesn't work 100% all of the time. Things can go wrong. So we're looking at certain diseases, etc., of the circulatory system. Okay, most of the ones are up there. There are a few words that you need to be able to be familiar with, right, when it comes to these. So once again, make sure that you understand all your terms and your terminology. Okay, so the diseases that we are going to look at now, we're going to look at high blood pressure, hypertension, right, and to a certain extent low blood pressure. We're going to look at this concept of atherosclerosis. It's a long word, I know, but basically it's when fat lines our blood vessels, and that could lead to the things, a heart attack or a stroke. So a lot of these things that we're going to look at just singularly actually can occur because of a combination of all of these things happening together. And it's really important, all right, that we try and have a healthy diet and we eat healthy and we look after ourselves so that these things obviously don't occur. So guys, the first thing we're going to look at is hypertension. Now, if you remember one of our slides, we looked at this concept of blood pressure. And what blood pressure is when the blood comes out of the heart, right? It forces pressure onto our aorta, onto the arteries, all right? So our heart has this contraction, systolic, and then our heart has a rest, diastolic. So when we measure our blood pressure, I don't know if you guys have ever had your blood pressure measured before. It's the name for it's called a baumanometer. All right, that little black machine, I don't know if you've ever needed it, a nurse or a doctor or somebody has taken your blood pressure and they put like a cuff around there and they pump up the air, and basically what they're doing is they close off your blood vessel. All right, and then they slowly, all right, release it, and what happens, that machine sees that first pressure of that contraction of the heart, and then when your heart relaxes, what is the pressure there? Now, if you remember that, what we're looking at, so it takes a reading, and this is considered to be a normal reading, 120/80. So a contraction of 120 milligrams, right? So it's got a whole pressure over 80. Now, as this goes higher, all right, so as we go higher, so what happens is we suffer from hypertension, blood pressure, okay? High blood pressure. You can also have low blood pressure. It's not as dangerous as high blood pressure, right? High blood pressure can bring in a lot of things, all right? As I said to you, high blood pressure can cause a lot of other things that could happen. Now, when we come to the high blood pressure, you'll notice there's a few things that make you at risk. Number one, if you're male, men tend to suffer more from high blood pressure than women. Second thing, obviously, the older you get, age can come into being. And your diet, all right, how you look after yourself, etc. And the one thing that you cannot control, unfortunately, is genetics. Some people are as healthy as can be, right, and they have high blood pressure. Unfortunately, it is a genetic thing, right, that you're going to have to be able to control using medication. But what I want to show you about when it comes to high blood pressure, why salt is such a danger. And I'm going to call upon, all right, osmosis. Now, guys, I want you to think, remember, our cells have got a lot of roundabout, we've got a lot of cells, we've got this interstitial fluid. Now, if I have a lot of salt in my diet, imagine there's a lot of salt in my blood. Where does water move? From a high concentration to a low concentration. It moves into my blood, which makes my blood fuller. And what does fuller mean? It means more pressure. Okay, and that is why, as you see over here, very important, when you do have hypertension, salt is one of the things that you need to really watch. And I challenge you, go and have a look at any of your food wrappers. Any single thing that you eat, one of the things you'll see all the time is sodium, sodium, sodium. All right, there's a lot of, you don't think about it, you're thinking, oh, I don't put too much salt in my food. Go and eat bread. Bread is full of salt. Every single thing that you have to eat, all right, you will find the sodium is going to be, all right, on that food label. So obviously, high blood pressure, having this high blood pressure could make you, all right, more inclined to have a few of the things that we're going to look at just now. Okay, so now the next concept that we're going to have a look at is atherosclerosis. Now, guys, what happens here is, remember what I said to you, fat and cholesterol, which is a type of fat, do not dissolve in waters. When you looked at biochemistry, that's what you saw. So what happens is here, if I do have too much fat in my diet, look what it does. It lines my arteries, right? And this is called plaque, right? Just like the plaque that is on your teeth, you know, the things that make your teeth yellow, that's plaque. That's exactly what it does. Now look what happens over here, all right? What happens over here? What's happening to the blood? Two things could happen over here. We got two options that could happen. Number one, the vessel becomes blocked. Or number two, the vessel bursts. All right. And when we're doing that, when it blocks and when it bursts, what is happening? The blood is going to go out. All right. and damage is going to occur. Now, very often, where does the fat line? It lines the arteries of my heart, coronary artery disease. Because where there's not a lot of fat in my arteries, because the arteries don't transport fat. But if I think of my lymphatic system, that fat will return to my circulatory system around the area that leads to my heart. So it's my heart arteries that are usually going to get blocked. Okay, so what happens is it's either going to burst or it's going to get blocked. Now, if it bursts or if it gets blocked, either way, the tissues are not going to get oxygen. They are going to starve, right? And that is going to have a very dangerous effect. So if we have a look at this, okay, so if I have in my brain, a stroke, right, is a blockage or it bursts, something bursts in my brain. So again, guys, very important, a stroke. So what happens is your brain, the blood is interrupted. Very simply, what will happen? It will burst or it will block. So the tissue, my brain around that area gets damaged. Right now, it all depends on where it is in the brain. Later on, when you look at the central nervous system, you're going to study the brain. And the brain has got very special parts of what functions it does. So if the burst or the rupture or the blockage occurs in the area for motor function, maybe I can't move. Maybe in the area where I talk, maybe I can't talk. Maybe it's, right, paralysis, anything like that. So that's what happens when the blood either bursts or clots in my brain. Now, when that occurs in the heart, we talk about a heart attack. The big word for it is myocardial infarction. Okay, it's a really big word, so we stick to a heart attack. Now, basically what it is, it's coronary heart disease, and simply that means it's the blood vessels, okay? That the blood vessels are either blocked or they burst, and that stops as soon as I stop oxygen getting to the heart. What happens to the muscles? It dies. Now, I don't know if any of you have family members who this has happened with, but obviously there's ways that they need to be able to correct it. I don't know if you ever heard of a bypass before, and simply it means is, look here, they've bypassed the area that is damaged. They take a little vein from somewhere else in your body and they bypass. So I don't know if you've seen maybe in the TV series, lots of hospital series, they send in a little thing and the balloon pops open and it tries to get rid of that blockage. All right, trying to make sure that it's clear that the blood can work there. And guys, South Africa, all right, we had the very first heart transplant. Right, Christian Barnard in Cape Town at the Grooteskeer, the very first heart transplant was here in South Africa. So that is, again, the heart transplant, sometimes when the heart is so diseased that we need to have a replacement. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I hope you had learned a lot, new concepts. Until next time, cherry bye.